When a player of Francisco Lindor's stature makes an accusation, the baseball world listens. Not because accusations are rare in professional baseball. Arguments happen every day. Disputes over calls, disagreements over rules, frustrations that spill out of dugouts and into press conferences and onto social media. These are part of the fabric of the sport. They come and they go, and most of them dissolve within 24 hours without leaving a mark on anything permanent. But this was different. This was Francisco Lindor. A captain. A leader. One of the most respected voices in the game today, not just for what he does on the field, but for how he carries himself off it. A player whose credibility has been built across years of competing at the highest level with a consistency and a character that the sport genuinely respects. And Francisco Lindor was not venting frustration after a tough loss. He was not reaching for an excuse or deflecting accountability. He was making a specific, serious, on-record claim about something that happened during 10 strikeouts in a single game. He said Ohtani broke the rules. 4 words. Precise. Deliberate. Public. The moment those words landed, everything else stopped. The standings didn't matter in that moment. The box scores didn't matter. The highlight clips and the broadcast reactions and the social media celebrations, none of it mattered. Because a respected captain had just stood in front of cameras and pointed directly at the performance that everyone had been celebrating and said something was wrong with it. And now MLB had a decision to make. Because Lindor did not make this claim from a distance. He did not review footage and arrive at a conclusion from the safety of a broadcast booth or an analytical desk. He was in the batter's box. He faced Ohtani directly, multiple times across that game, and what he experienced in those at-bats is what led him to the press conference and the 4 words that detonated across the sport. The game itself had been a showcase. Ohtani was operating at a level that the crowd recognized immediately, the kind of start where you sense from the first inning that something special is building. His fastball had exceptional carry. His breaking ball was landing with precision that made opposing hitters look like they were guessing in the dark. His splitter was disappearing out of the zone at the exact moment hitters committed to swinging. 10 strikeouts. That was the final number. 10 professional major league hitters, sent back to the dugout unable to put the ball in play. A performance that generated standing ovations and broadcast superlatives and the kind of immediate historical framing that only the very best starts receive. Lindor was one of those 10 strikeouts. And unlike most hitters who walk back to the dugout after getting struck out by Ohtani and process it as the result of facing elite stuff, Lindor walked back to the dugout with something else. A question. A specific, concrete, baseball question about what had just happened to him at the plate. That question did not leave him. It stayed through the rest of the game. It was still with him when the final out was recorded. And it was fully formed and ready to be stated publicly by the time he sat down in front of the microphones. This is important to understand clearly, because the initial coverage of his statement focused heavily on the drama of a star player accusing Ohtani of wrongdoing, and in doing so, sometimes lost the specific technical nature of what Lindor was actually claiming. He was not making a vague accusation. He was not saying something felt off or seemed unusual or didn't match his general experience of facing elite pitching. He was making a precise claim about the behavior of the baseball during specific pitches, pitches that ended at-bats, pitches that contributed directly to the strikeout total that the sport was now celebrating. Lindor's claim centered on the movement profile of Ohtani's pitches during those at-bats. Specifically, he described a late movement characteristic on certain pitches that, in his experience and judgment, exceeded what natural grip, natural spin, and natural mechanics could produce. He described the ball doing something in the final few feet of its path to the plate that felt, from his perspective as a hitter with years of experience tracking pitches at the major league level, inconsistent with what physics and mechanics alone should allow. He was careful with his language. He did not use the word cheating in his initial statement. He said Ohtani broke rules. And the distinction between those two phrases matters enormously in how the claim needs to be processed. Breaking rules in this context has a specific meaning. It points toward the foreign substance regulations that MLB implemented and has enforced with varying degrees of consistency since the crackdown that reshaped the pitching landscape several seasons ago. Sticky substances. Anything that artificially enhances grip beyond the rosin bag that every pitcher is permitted to use. Anything that adds spin or movement to a baseball beyond what natural mechanics produce. Lindor was saying he believed something in that category had been present during those 10 strikeouts. And he was saying it publicly, with his name attached, with full awareness of what that claim would set in motion. This is the part of the story that moved faster than anyone expected. Because MLB has protocols for exactly this kind of situation, a formal, on-record claim made by a player about rule violations during a specific game performance. The protocols exist precisely because the foreign substance issue has been sensitive and unresolved enough that the league cannot afford to treat allegations casually, regardless of who is making them or who they are directed at. Within hours of Lindor's statement becoming public, the league had opened a review. Not a full investigation, the language used was careful to distinguish between a review and a formal investigation, a distinction that carries significant legal and procedural weight in the context of player discipline and potential stat adjustments. But a review. An official, documented, league-initiated examination of the game footage, the baseballs used during the performance, and any relevant umpire reports from that day. The question of whether MLB could void Ohtani's pitching statistics from that game, the 10 strikeouts, the innings pitched, the ERA impact, all of it, became the central conversation almost immediately. And it is a conversation worth examining carefully, because the answer is more complicated than either side of the debate was initially acknowledging. The league has voided statistics before. It is rare, but it has happened. The conditions under which statistical records can be officially invalidated are narrow and specific, requiring documented evidence of rule violations that directly affected the outcomes in question. The burden of proof is high. The process is slow. And the precedent, such as it exists, does not point toward a simple or quick resolution. But the conversation had started. And once that conversation starts, it does not stop easily. The first phase was disbelief. Not the performed disbelief of an organization managing a public relations situation, but genuine, honest disbelief that a performance of that caliber, one that had been delivered in full view of umpires, cameras, and a stadium full of witnesses, was now the subject of a league review based on a claim made in a post-game press conference. The second phase was anger. This is understandable. When an organization believes its player has competed cleanly and produced a legitimate result, and that result is suddenly placed under a cloud, the emotional response is not calm. Players, coaches, and front office personnel who had watched that game and celebrated what happened were now being asked to hold that celebration in suspension while a process unfolded that they had no control over. The third phase, which arrived more slowly, was the phase that actually mattered. The phase of letting the process work. Of trusting that a fair examination of the evidence would reach a fair conclusion. Of understanding that the integrity of the game requires that claims like Lindor's be taken seriously regardless of who they are directed at, and that taking them seriously ultimately protects everyone, including the players whose performances are being questioned. This is the phase that defined how the organization handled the situation publicly. Measured statements. Cooperation with the review process. Confidence expressed without aggression. A posture that said, essentially, look at everything, because everything will hold up. This is where his character in this situation becomes the most important part of the story. Because making a public accusation of this kind against a player of Ohtani's stature, in the middle of a season, with full awareness of the scrutiny and the pushback and the inevitable question about motivation, this is not a small thing. This is not something a player does casually or without significant personal cost. Lindor faced that cost immediately. The reaction from sections of the baseball world was swift and harsh. He was accused of sour grapes. He was accused of attempting to tarnish a performance he had no ability to compete against. He was accused of using a procedural mechanism to accomplish what his bat could not accomplish in the batter's box. He heard all of it. And he did not change his statement. He appeared in front of cameras a second time and repeated his claim with the same precision and the same composure. He was not shouting. He was not performing outrage. He was simply stating, again, what he believed he had experienced, and making clear that he had made his claim through the appropriate channels and would allow the process to proceed. This is the behavior of someone who genuinely believes what they are saying. This is not the behavior of a player manufacturing controversy for attention. The personal cost of maintaining this position was visible and real, and Lindor absorbed it without flinching. If Lindor was right, if the review found something, if the evidence supported his claim, what would it mean for the 10 strikeouts? For the game's official record? For the statistical legacy of a performance that had been celebrated as one of the best pitching outings of the season? The answer to that question lives in territory that baseball has not fully mapped. The sport has rules for foreign substances. It has discipline protocols for violations. What it does not have is a clean, settled, universally agreed-upon framework for what happens to the statistics generated by a performance that is found to have violated those rules. Voiding the strikeouts would be unprecedented in the modern era. It would create a precedent with implications that extend far beyond this single game and this single player. It would open questions about other performances, other seasons, other statistical records that the sport has no desire to reopen. Not voiding them, if a violation is found, would create a different problem. It would mean that the official record contains statistics produced through rule-breaking. That the 10 strikeouts stand as legitimate achievements when they were not achieved legitimately. That the celebration was real but the foundation beneath it was not. There is no clean answer in that territory. Only difficult choices with consequences that ripple outward in every direction. Or maybe it was exactly as big as he intended. Because Francisco Lindor is not a player who stumbles into public statements of this magnitude by accident. He is precise. He is deliberate. He has spent enough time in the spotlight to understand exactly what happens when a captain of his stature makes a specific on-record claim about a specific performance by a specific player. He knew what he was starting. He started it anyway. And what he started now sits in the hands of the league, a review process, a set of evidence, a framework of rules and precedents and difficult choices that will eventually produce a conclusion of some kind. Whether that conclusion validates Lindor's claim or clears Ohtani completely, one thing is already settled. The 10 strikeouts that everyone celebrated will never be looked at the same way again. Not because of what the review finds, but because a respected captain stood up and asked the question out loud, in public, with his name attached. In baseball, as in most things, once a question like that is asked, the answer, whatever it turns out to be, changes everything.